Okay, this is look here. All nitrate salt are soluble. This is soluble. This is yellow color is soluble. This one is insoluble. This is almost insoluble, slightly soluble. This one slightly soluble. So we have seen here all nitrate are soluble, like ammonium nitrate is soluble, potassium nitrate is soluble, sodium nitrate is soluble, barium nitrate soluble, calcium nitrate soluble, magnesium nitrate soluble, aluminum nitrate soluble, zinc nitrate soluble, iron nitrate soluble, lead nitrate soluble, copper nitrate soluble, silver nitrate soluble. So all nitrate are soluble. This is the soluble sign. Okay, now chloride salt. Ammonium chloride is soluble, potassium chloride is soluble, sodium chloride is soluble, barium chloride is soluble, calcium chloride is soluble, magnesium chloride soluble, aluminum chloride soluble, zinc chloride soluble, iron chloride soluble. Lead chloride is insoluble. Have you seen? Lead chloride is insoluble. This is most importantly, lead chloride is insoluble. Copper chloride soluble. Silver chloride insoluble. So we have found 2 chloride is insoluble. Which are 2 chloride insoluble? Are you listening me? Which 2 chloride are insoluble? Lead chloride and silver chloride. Lead chloride and silver chloride is okay. Now third column, ammonium sulfate is soluble, potassium sulfate is soluble, sodium sulfate is soluble, barium sulfate is insoluble. Barium sulfate is insoluble. Calcium sulfate is slightly soluble. This is the slightly. Calcium sulfate is slightly soluble. Magnesium sulfate soluble. Aluminum sulfate soluble. Zinc sulfate soluble. Iron sulfate soluble. Now lead substance is insoluble. Look, all are insoluble except a nitrate. If you find any lead except nitrate, any lead salt insoluble except nitrate. Okay, this look, all lead chloride, lead sulfate, lead carbonate, lead hydroxide, all are insoluble except nitrate. Okay, now sulfate, iron sulfate soluble, lead sulfate insoluble, copper sulfate soluble, silver sulfate slightly soluble. Now look here, ammonium carbonate soluble, potassium carbonate soluble, sodium carbonate soluble. Only 2 carbonate is soluble, rest carbonate are insoluble. Rest carbonate like this is barium carbonate insoluble, calcium carbonate insoluble, magnesium carbonate insoluble, aluminum carbonate insoluble, zinc carbonate, iron carbonate insoluble. This is the lead carbonate insoluble, copper carbonate insoluble, silver carbonate insoluble. All are insoluble except ammonium, potassium, sodium. Look, all ammonium, potassium, nitrate, all ammonium salt are soluble, all potassium salt are soluble, all sodium salt are soluble. You have to remember, all ammonium salt is soluble, all potassium salt is soluble, all sodium salt is soluble. Now hydroxide, ammonium hydroxide is soluble, potassium hydroxide is soluble, sodium hydroxide is soluble. Barium hydroxide is soluble, but calcium hydroxide is slightly soluble, and restings is insoluble. Okay, so what is the summary? How can you memorize these things? If you find any nitrate salt, they are soluble. Okay, or any ammonium salt are soluble. All potassium salt are soluble. All sodium salt are soluble. Calcium nitrate is the soluble. Calcium nitrate. This salt is the this salt soluble or insoluble? Soluble. Why? Because all nitrate salt are soluble. All nitrate salt are soluble. All nitrate salt are soluble. Have you seen? All nitrate salt are soluble. Okay. There is ammonium salt. All ammonium salt soluble. All potassium salt are soluble. All sodium hydroxide salt is soluble. Okay, ammonium chloride is the soluble or insoluble or slightly soluble? Why? Soluble. Because because all ammonium are soluble, like ammonium nitrate, ammonium chloride, ammonium sulfate, ammonium carbonate, ammonium hydroxide, all are soluble. All ammonium salt are soluble. All ammonium salt are soluble. Ammonium chloride, ammonium sulfate, ammonium sulfate, ammonium sulfate, ammonium nitrate. Ammonia আসলে কি soluble? Ammonium carbonate. So all ammonium salt are soluble. Okay, all are soluble. This one is soluble. This one is soluble. This soluble. Okay, you have to this carbonate. 3 carbonate are soluble. Ammonium carbonate, potassium carbonate, sodium carbonate soluble, but magnesium carbonate insoluble, aluminum carbonate insoluble. Okay, you have to memorize these things. Now next question. You should remember these 2 things. Slightly soluble which are? Slightly is calcium sulfate and 2 sulfate. 3 things. Look, 3. Calcium sulfate and silver sulfate. Calcium sulfate and silver sulfate is slightly soluble. And here calcium hydroxide. Calcium sulfate and calcium hydroxide. Calcium sulfate and calcium hydroxide is slightly soluble. And silver sulfate. 2 sulfate, calcium sulfate and silver sulfate. And calcium hydroxide. Okay, this thing slightly soluble. all note that all sodium, potassium, ammonium compounds are soluble. All nitrate are soluble. Most common chloride are soluble except lead chloride, silver chloride. Most common chlorides are soluble except lead chloride, silver chloride. Most common sulfate are soluble except lead sulfate, barium sulfate, silver sulfate, calcium sulfate, except অনেকগুলো এগুলো বেশি। The most common carbonate are insoluble except sodium, potassium and ammonium carbonates. Most metal hydroxide are insoluble. Most metal hydroxide are insoluble except sodium, potassium, ammonium hydroxide. Calcium hydroxide is slightly soluble in water. Now here I have a test. Everyone should unmute. Now we'll give answer. Question 1. Which one is soluble in water? Which one is soluble in water? Sodium nitrate, lead chloride, silver sulfate? Sodium nitrate. Yes, good. Get the answer. Okay, next question. Thank you, Jeudisa. Thank you so much. Second question. Here sodium nitrate is soluble. The sodium nitrate is soluble because all nitrate are soluble. Okay, which one is insoluble? Which is insoluble? Silver chloride নেই এটা আমি জানি না দেখবো এখন silver chloride বলছো insoluble sodium sulfate soluble potassium sulfate also soluble all nitrate are soluble, so this one will be okay. Silver nitrate, this is we know all sulfate sodium and all salt are soluble, potassium and all salt are soluble, and nitrate here soluble, so this one will be exceptions. This one will be answer. Okay, so it is insoluble is silver chloride. Good. Okay, which one is slightly soluble in water? Silver chloride slightly soluble. Okay, yes, answer. Thank you. সিলভার সালফেট নেই আচ্ছা দেখি এটা আচ্ছা এই দুইটা হবে না বেরিয়াম নাইট্রেট হবে না পটাশিয়াম সালফেট হবে না এরা কিন্তু সলিবল আমরা জানি নাইট্রেট অল সলিবল আর পটাশিয়াম ম্যাগনেসিয়াম সোডিয়াম সালফেট অল আর সলিবল এই দুইটার মধ্যে হবে সিলভার ক্লোরাইড আর সিলভার নাইট সালফেট এটা তোমাদের মনে রাখা দরকার আমার দরকার নাই কে সিলভার ক্লোরাইড ইজ ইনসলিবল আর সিলভার সালফেট আচ্ছা সিলভার ক্লোরাইড এখানে কি ইনসলিবল আর সিলভার সালফেট হচ্ছে স্লাইটলি সলিবল সিলভার সালফেট ইজ insoluble silver chloride. Okay, this is insoluble silver chloride. Slightly it is silver sulfate. Okay, slightly silver sulfate. Here MCQ question will come from here. Okay, evaluation. What is salt? Thank you so much. Yes, all acid contain hydrogen. When hydrogen is replaced by metal substance form is called salt. Okay, what is solubility? Have you seen question what is solubility? What is solubility? Okay, are you listening? What is solubility? What is solubility? Solubility is the amount of solid dissolved in a certain amount of solvent. How much amount is solute? How much amount of solute is dissolved at a particular at certain amount of solvent at a definite temperature is called solubility. Like in a 100-gram solvent, how much solute dissolved? If the solvent is water, solute is sodium chloride salt. If in a water, in 100 gram in water, if sodium chloride dissolves 36 gram, so solubility will be 36 gram. Okay, at a particular temperature. Okay, if in a 100-gram solvent, if solute is dissolved 40 gram, so solubility will be 40 gram. So how much of solute is dissolved at a 100-gram of solvent at a particular temperature is called solubility of that substance. Okay, have you understood? If in a 100-gram water, if 40 gram sodium hydroxide dissolved, what is the solubility? Solubility is 40 gram. Yes. Okay, what are the product form when calcium carbonate react with hydrochloric acid? তারপরে yes, এটা হইছে, এটা আজকে পড়াইছে তো আমি। What are the product formed when calcium carbonate react with hydrochloric acid? One salt form, water form, and carbon dioxide. Salt is hydrochloric acid and calcium. Hydrochloric acid form which salt? Chloride salt. Hydrochloric acid form chloride salt and calcium. So calcium chloride, water, and yes, carbon dioxide. Thank you for joining the class.